Welcome back to Martins and More. My name is Maury Rutch.
And I'm Spoon Phillips.
And today's program is brought to you by the Martin CSSC 2022. The Custom Shop CSSC 2022 is packed with custom features, and it's the first Nazareth-made Martin with revolutionary SC body style. It features solid East Indian rosewood back and sides, a VTS Sitka top. It's kind of a cross between an SC13E and an OM28 Modern Deluxe. For more information on the CSSC 2022, please visit us online or contact us today. We have a lot to talk about today, Spoon. How you doing?
I am doing just fine. How you doing?
How you doing? As you could tell, we are broadcasting live from Brooklyn today.
That's right. Brooklyn, New York. Yes, I've been a resident of Brooklyn for decades now, and once in a while, if I'm a little too tired, I will say coffee and catch myself sliding into some Brooklynese now and again.
Nice.
But how are things out there in Pennsylvania?
It's finally becoming warm on a consistent basis. We got fooled pretty well maybe 2 months ago, 2 or 3 days of 70s, and then it goes down to the 30s, and then we get like 5 or 6 days of rain. But I'll tell you right now, sitting here in the end of May, we had a good 10-day stretch of nothing but sunshine. You know, don't get me wrong, it's still cool in the evening, but I think it's safe to say that winter madness is all the way behind us. It's going to be smooth sailing now. We're going to get the kayaks out there. We're going to get the bikes out. And we're going to get some really cool short podcast episodes coming soon.
Because it's going to be shorts weather. And everybody knows Maury how much he enjoys going out in shorts, singing about spring.
Speaking of singing, there's a very cool idea that's not my own, but one of our loyal listeners did ask us maybe a few months ago, back when we were soliciting some ideas for new podcast shows, why don't we talk about songwriting and the recording process? Let me ask you, Spoon, is today a good day to do something like that? Or are you feeling a song in your heart?
Well, what would you do if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Wait, Maury, come back. I won't sing, I promise. Well, folks, apparently I'm here all by myself now. Oh, he's back. Unfortunately, I thought I had the show to myself. But yeah, that would be fine. I would be happy to talk about songwriting, the rather mystical endeavor for some of us. For others, it's a more practical application and skill and craft. So it's a very personal thing. So I'm very curious to hear all about songwriting from the perspective of Maury Rutch, who's written some really great songs.
Well, thank you, but I'm going to be a gentleman and ask you to go first. One of my favorite songs, and I'm going to sound like a fanboy now, but one of my favorite Spoon Phillips songs used to be on the beginning of the virtual tour program at Maury's Music from time to time. It's called Chinatown, and I'd love for you to explain to me and our listeners all about writing that and maybe where the inspiration came from. But when this is over, I want everyone to know exactly all they can about one of my favorite Spoon tunes, Chinatown.
Oh, so that one. Well, that one goes way back, and it's an interesting example because I seem to practice songwriting from the David Crosby school, which is take forever to polish songs into little gems that sometimes take years before they come to fruition. But also, I find myself, when it comes to writing songs, that some songs start with lyrics. And so in other words, poetry that then turns into song lyrics. And I feel there's a difference between lyrics and poems, though they often can be the same thing. But not all poems work for songs, certainly not traditional melodic songs, and not all prose does either, for that matter. And I often, hear people basically writing out their idea and their what's basically prose, and then trying to force it into music, as opposed to then going back to it and turning it into song lyrics. And with Chinatown, it was kind of a mix of both of those things. The song itself continues to evolve to the point that I have recently changed the opening line and to fit the song better, because the song evolved into something different than the initial germ of it. And this goes back 30 years probably, where one day in a very early morning, I was walking down Lower Broadway, heading to a theater where the play that I was directing was moving in from its rehearsal space up in Times Square, and I was getting ready to go into 3 days of technical rehearsals. And it was super early on a Sunday morning, and I walked by a parking lot that wasn't opened yet, like just a corner blacktop parking lot that would have an attendant, but there was a car in it, and it was clearly a plainclothes police officer drinking a cup of coffee. And that was one image that I remembered so clearly of that morning walking downtown Manhattan very early in the morning. And then as I was about to turn right, literally and figuratively, into 3 hectic days of technical rehearsals, I noticed that the other early risers that were walking down the sidewalk ahead of me were continuing on and turning left into this golden sunrise. And I was sorely tempted to play hooky and follow them and turn left onto Canal Street and walk into Chinatown, and which is one of my favorite places. And so that began this long, at times, troublesome, how do I put that into a song? And it was basically a love song to a place. And some of the words came out pretty quickly, but others had chunks that just wouldn't come, even after I had the melody and even after I discovered what the bridge was going to be musically. And I think Maury at some point is going to be adding in little audio snippets and also linking in the comments below to a video of this song, or whatever other songs we end up talking about. So that's how Chinatown began, and it has a verse. The first verse is about the early morning. The second verse is basically about the afternoon and the day, and the third verse is about the evening and the fall of night, and basically somebody spending an entire day in this historic and lively neighborhood in New York City. And so the original line that I've sang for many years and that you'll see all over the internet is, a fat white cop, begins with a fat white cop, gets some coffee in a coffee shop. And I just this year, when I was getting ready to perform at a show here in New York with a couple of former band members who were backing me up, I changed the lyric to a young white cop. And because at the end of this the last verse begins with the line, an old black cop gives the time to a passing socialite. And so having a young cop in the morning and a young white cop in the morning and an old black cop in the evening basically puts the bookends on it of the early morning sunrise and the end of the day, nighttime. And so it took me only 33 years probably to finally do that. So I finally feel like I've done my last chip of the chisel in the sculpture of what is Chinatown. So that's a rather long introduction, but I don't know if that gives you some of the information you wanted.
Well, it just makes me nervous that if we hurry through this, you might come up with the really awesome middle part of the song in 66 years, and I might not be around to hear it.
I'm rather pleased with the middle part of the song when the bridge finally showed up, and
I mean, I just think it's so neat that like different people were in the presidency when the song started than when the first verse got fixed. I think that's pretty cool.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's it's one of the things, and I'm certainly not the only person. Where's a good example of this that I recently heard, where some famous songwriter, it might be Van Morrison, changed his lyric. Oh, in fact, it is Van Morrison in Into the Mystic.
Oh.
He no longer says, "Rocks my gypsy soul." And I think that may be related to the fact that gypsy in those days was used to mean like, a traveling guy. Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie, all those kind of people would use that term. But today it's actually considered a derogatory term for a ethnic minority in Europe, the Romani, who certainly Django Reinhardt called himself a gypsy, or the French word for gypsy, but lately it's become a socially sensitive word, and Van Morrison doesn't use the word any longer. He just says, "rock my soul." So I found that pretty fascinating, that, there are definitely people, Bob Dylan certainly has tweaked his lyrics over the years. The version of Rockin' Chair that the Byrds do, and that is the published version, isn't the version that's on Bob Dylan's Greatest Hits Volume 2. It's completely different, or almost completely different lyrics. So I'm in good company when it comes to slowly adjusting lyrics. So for listeners out there writing your own songs, don't be afraid. Nothing has to be carved in stone. It's your creation, and so keep creating it as you see fit.
Well, I was just about to compare you to Bob Dylan and Van Morrison, but thanks for getting me there early. Let's take a minute and listen to a little bit of a sample of one of my favorite tunes, Chinatown.
There's an excellent dumpling house called the Excellent Dumpling House. The businessman's lunch said he's so free. The afternoon's flow, the herbal cure stirred up in porcelain bowls, as the tourists grapple with their first sweet bubble tea, and the soft black pearls in the eyes of a Chinese girl bring new meaning to love at first sight. My heart takes flight till it plunges with delight to kiss the heart, Chinatown. Oh, Chinatown, Chinatown. Some ride right under you, others go down. And I'm throbbing with that music, smiling every face I meet, fill the veins, Chinatown.
Now, I'm tempted, Spoon, to say something off the record, but it should be on the record. One of my favorite lines in that song, I'm going to get it wrong, but I want to ask you something about washing the day to the curb with a garden hose. I just want to ask you first, what exactly is the line?
So the last verse includes the all the fish markets close and wash the day to the curb with a garden hose, and that's a typical image for anybody who's been to really any kind of traditional old ethnic neighborhood, regardless of the ethnicity, with the vegetable dealers and the fishmongers and all that cleaning up, particularly the fishmongers, cleaning up at the end of the day. You'll see these people out with garden hoses with the water pistol on the end of it, blasting the sidewalk and blasting everything, into the gutter, and to clean off the sidewalk around their shop. And that's something that's been going on there since the invention of indoor plumbing.
Well, I must say that whole song's full of imagery, but when I hear that line, I mean, I went to school in Philly, and I can literally close my eyes, and I'm there, I don't know, it was a fish market, but I'm totally seeing with complete clarity that scene, and I feel like it's 1990 again, and it's just it's so neat how I know the part's coming, and when I listen to that tune, I recognize where I'm at in the song, and I know what I'm going to hear later, but still, when you're hearing that with music, it's so neat how your mind's eye goes to this little movie for a second, and that's something I've probably gotten more out of that song from time to time, but that part of it literally is always the same, and that lyric in that song really just sticks with me pretty long for some reason.
That's fascinating. You would say 1990 because that may in fact be the year when Chinatown came together. And I'm trying to remember because I'm trying to think. I was asked to come into a rep company called Stillwater's acting company of actors that had studied at the neighborhood playhouse or from one of the other proteges of the master teacher, Sandy Meisner, that was at the neighborhood playhouse, a guy named Greg Zittel, and people that went through his studio. And they asked me to come in and take over as artistic director, and this was the first full-length production that I had done for them. So that's got to be 1990, possibly 1991, but I'm pretty sure it was 1990. So that's interesting that you had basically the same experience that I did in the same year in separate cities, and just shows how we are continue to be brothers in Martin, or brothers by different mothers.
That's freaky.
Yeah, pretty cool. So I would like to maybe come back at you with one of my favorite songs, which is, of course, October.
Ooh.
Which I know is a lot of people's favorite song when it comes to songs by yours over there in Coaldale, Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you. People joke that that's on my greatest hit album. It's funny how I feel like I put a lot of time into songwriting in the late 90s, and I feel like I have probably 15 songs, and I'm really proud of some of them, and I'm really proud of maybe 2 of them, and that's one that gets a lot of rotation in my acoustic act, whether it's solo or a duo or in the band. But I often watch interviews with songwriters, and Tom Petty clip is coming to mind now, where he might have been quoted at one time. He would talk about writing a song and it's kind of coming to him. It's not creating. You're not thinking of what do I put here. You're just kind of hearing this song. And the best way I could describe October, first of all, the time of it, and I'll be freaked out if you were also in New England around this year, because then we're going to have 2 songs in a row where we have the same telepathic experience. But I was really lucky enough to get married in October of 1998, and we honeymooned in beautiful Cape Cod area of Massachusetts. And maybe this is going to sound really interesting or really dumb. I'll wear whatever you put on me here, but I don't remember I don't think I had a guitar with me. I'm almost sure I did not. I don't remember feeling like I could bring an instrument on a honeymoon, so I'm sure I didn't have a guitar with me. And it was one of those rare times in an entire year. It might be the only 7 days I wasn't with a guitar. But I sort of remember feeling like I'm hearing this song that's my song, and I didn't create it yet, but I'm hearing it played in my mind. So I definitely heard the melody and the chord progression. We'll play a snippet of it later. You'll find a very similar feel to part of Message in a Bottle. It's not chorus for chorus. It's kind of, I use some of a chorus feel of that song in my verse, but not the melody, just the way that the chords move back and forth. And I must have had that song in my mind, but I didn't realize that until years later. But I came up with the melody and most of the words, and I do remember coming home after that 7 days being gone, having the song almost done. And I mean, melody, chords, words, bridge, it almost felt like in my sleep or in my subconscious, I was learning a song from someone else. And after a week was over, it was almost done. And then I ended up putting it on one of my CDs. I came out with a couple of CDs in 97 and 99. And so it was my second CD, and I remember having some friends play on different tracks. And it was arranged a certain way where it was just guitar, a little bit of electric piano, and a couple of vocals. But really quickly after that, the different bands that I was in, whether it was a duo with Tim or our four-piece band, the Shell Shock Churchills, we immediately started playing it more than a few different ways. And I've got a couple different recordings we can choose from when I include a snippet here in this podcast. But it's a song that was written extremely quickly. It wasn't really changed all that much, but as you mentioned, your little anecdote about having the first line after so many years became something different. There are parts in this song where every time you sing the chorus, the first two times you're supposed to sing so much to see, and then the last part of the song is too much to see. And if anybody listening to this show, if you're in a band, you know what I'm going to say next. None of these guys ever sing it right. And it's always too much to see, too much to see, too much to see. No more subtleties with building a little bit of tension in a lyric and having it start where so much and then it ends in too much. Nah, we're going to go right to the payday. But other than that, it really has stayed the same, except for I really like it a lot better now with drums and bass and electric guitar. So I have a song that's basically on a CD from 1999. That's a stripped down version. I've played completely stripped down versions alone with just my guitar and my vocal, but my favorite version would certainly be when the Churchills play it. And as we're recording this in late May, we just played 4 days ago, and we did a good version of it. So it's one of those things. If I had been in that band in a recording capacity back in 1999, I would have insisted that's how it would have been put to tape. But it's one of my favorite songs to play, and it's anytime you can sing a song for 2 or 3 minutes and it instantly reminds you of a honeymoon, I mean, you can tell why I'm never bothered when someone asks to hear it, for sure.
Well, that's fascinating on many levels. I knew the background of it, but you mentioned several things I did not know. One, you mentioned that it basically fell out of you, that you had the lyrics and the melody and how it was going to be sung in your head before you ever got a chance to really go work it out on an instrument. And that has happened to me rarely, but it has happened to me, that same sort of thing. The other thing is, you mentioned that you were consciously aware of somebody else's song that was kind of in the mode that you were hearing in your head. I would have never guessed, listening to that song, I would never guessed in a million years that Police song had any connection to it whatsoever. But I have done the same thing, and I'm trying to remember what it was when I had something stuck in my head, like a groove, or basically like like when I would be out walking in the woods, or taking a fitness walk here in the park by my home, or something like that, where certain cadences would get in my head. It could be Santana, it could be, I think in this case it was Talking Heads, and I don't remember what song it was now, but it prompted me to kind of spin off of it and end up creating a piece of music that had that. And I can't remember the name of the Talking Heads piece, but it's the one that's nonsense lyrics that David Byrne wrote to try to do a Dada-esque piece of music, and I can't remember what the name of the song is, but I know he does it in his that Broadway review that he had for quite a long time. He does it in that. But anyway, that was very, very similar situation. But I also wanted to point out that there's something, for some reason, from the moment I heard those opening hammer-on chords that you do at the beginning, and then keep reprising through the song, sounds maritime to me, not in a sea shanty way, but in a David Crosby way, in a Jimmy Buffett way, in a Kenny Chesney way even, or the guy that actually does all the fancy guitar work for Kenny Chesney, whose name I can't remember right now. But there was something about it that makes me think I can't call it calypso, I can't call it anything like that, and yet it seems, and that was when I instantly heard it. That was even before I heard the lyrics or knew that you were going to Cape Cod or anything like that. But there was just something about seagulls and seaside and sunny days on the waves that just had something evocative about that guitar part. And the fact that you had come up with it in your head without having a guitar in your hand while you're at Cape Cod and after, I think is absolutely fascinating. So,
thank you.
And then a final point I want to make about this. about your tale of the song is Lee Shore. All Along the Lee Shore, which you and I both love.
Ooh. Another
Another maritime song that David Crosby wrote, on a boat in a little lagoon somewhere in the Caribbean. My all-time favorite version is him doing it solo on his D45 in 1970 that's on Four-Way Street. But of course, they recorded it electrically, though it didn't make a record. And I don't remember, I think they even recorded it for Deja Vu, but maybe they recorded it after Deja Vu for the album they never completed before they broke up. But they recorded it electrically, and then of course there's the fabulous version they do on Crosby and Nash Live.
Yeah.
With the session guys from the LA session guys, Russ Kunkel and Tim Drummond, Craig Dorgy, and David Lindley, and that's awesome. And he's done a bunch of different electric versions of it ever since then, and they're all grand, even though I still hearken back to the scaled down acoustic version, just like I do with October. So.
Not to freak you out, but I'm gonna tie everything in a nice little bow, maybe more than once here. That's probably the CD that I was really wearing out in 1990-91 when I commented about thinking about your song. So we're gonna have that as a pretty good theme there. We're gonna keep coming back to what you and I were doing and listening to in 1991, just so you know.
Well, you also mentioned Tom Petty's quote, and that reminds me. Two things. One is, again, this kind of fell out of you, and there's the apocryphal story that Pacho and Lefty just fell out of Townes Van Zandt. He just sat down and wrote it out, and some parts of that apocryphal story, includes it coming to him in a dream. And if people haven't seen the little trailer about Paul Simon's new album, I highly recommend it on YouTube, where he's talking about the song and ultimately the concept for his latest album that he's put out now that he's 80 years old, came to him in a dream. So that's kind of a fascinating theme. But somebody handed me a book back in college that I think was called In Their Own Right, with the pun being WRITE. And it is short interviews with songwriters, lots and lots of songwriters, including Paul Simon. And it's a fascinating read because of how different everybody is about the task of songwriting, whether it's something that is artistic inspiration, something that is professional craft. Most professional songwriters sit down and write all day long and write tons and tons of songs they just throw away, and snatches and I've certainly had plenty of snatches of things that never turned into songs, and some things were borrowed and added into later songs, and particularly when it came to music, the music of abandoned songs. But one thing I remember clearly is Elvis Costello talking about the song Sneaky Feelings. Is that what it's called? It's from his first record. I can't believe I can't remember that tune, that's the name of that song. I think it's Sneaky Feelings. Forgive me, some of you out there, I'm sure people out there know what I'm talking about. But he said he consciously tried to write a song like Robbie Robertson. He was trying to write a song for the band, or a song that would have appeared on Music from Big Pink or one of the early band albums. And of course, the Elvis Costello song doesn't sound anything to me. When I read that, I was like, what? No way. But that was it came through his personal filters and came out of him. But that was the germ idea. And I think that's also fascinating. And I know many other people that attempt to do that say, I want to write a song that's like Elvis Costello, or that use that as an inspiration. How would Elvis Costello write this song? How would Neil Young write this song? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Finding inspiration in the Beatles certainly did it. And they grew up listening to Buddy Holly, and as did a zillion other people. in that era, and or Chuck Berry, of course, George Harrison, greatly influenced by Chet Atkins and by those guys, the rockabilly guys. Carl Perkins, thank you, that was the name I was looking for, and Little Richard. McCartney, when they were very young, on those BBC recordings that were released. Here's very young Paul McCartney, and there's the smarmy BBC. They're taking a break in their live performance on the BBC, and he says, "Paul, Ray, you're singing. Who are your major influences?" And he immediately says, "Little Richard." And immediately starts talking about Little Richard, who was a pretty controversial character in those days. And as he would be today, things come around, but goes around, comes around. But then the guy says, and here's Till There Was You. So he's talking about, the wailings of Little Richard. And then they go to him singing Rodgers and Hart or Rodgers and Hammerstein song, Till There Was You, from The Music Man. From My Fair Lady. But anyway, I always got a big kick out of that because it was not, I'm sure, what the BBC was hoping he was going to say. But
hold on, though. Could you picture Little Richard singing that?
Till There Was You. Exactly. So, but of course, I'm blabbing way too long. Before we go any further, let's hear some of Maury's awesome composition, October. So thank you for allowing me to ask you that question about that song. I wouldn't mind asking you more questions, but I'm afraid it may be time for you to ask me our version of... Huh?
Oh, 20 questions.
20 questions.
Okay, enough about this songwriting junk. Let's get down to brass tacks. Let's talk about the things we use to write the songs. I'm going to think of a Martin guitar, and you've got 20 opportunities to tell me what it is. Are you ready?
Yes. Now, just for people who've never heard this segment before, I am allowed to guess up to 3 instruments before I lose. So we'll see if I lose or I can figure it out.
Let's begin. 20 questions on the clock. That doesn't make sense. Go.
Is it a dreadnought?
Yes.
Well, that narrows it down to about 40 guitars. Are the back and sides mahogany?
No.
Are the back and sides rosewood?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so... is it a member of the Standard Series?
Yes.
Does it have a pearl rosette?
No.
Ooh.
Well, you think of good questions.
Ooh. Does it have scalloped bracing?
Yes.
Is it an HD35?
God. This kind of sucks that you're so good at this game. That was 7. You almost tied the record at 6.
Woof, woof. Well, I wasn't counting. I thought you were going to say no. I thought, well, let me eliminate that one. And then, but thank you.
Wow. Honest to God. We're going to call this 10 questions soon.
I'd be curious to hear, from some of our listeners, at least the ones on the YouTube version of this, that can leave comments, to hear, little songwriting point of view that they have. I'm sure there are many people out there that write songs, even if they don't share them with many people. And it's a fun experiment. As a lad, I woke up, right when I was first playing guitar, I woke up and went to work on some Saturday and came up with a song. Very simple pattern, E minor, C, G, D, I think. It turned into a song, but it was very hokey, early teenage, lyrics about some generic broken heart love relationship sort of thing. And so completely abandoned that, but then used it for a song that I wrote called Almost Happened. That's about a guy mythically from my hometown who hears stories about John Dillinger, who apparently was briefly in my county jail, and ultimately goes off to rob banks and becomes an outlaw and gets shot down by the law. And I used that song pattern. And then later, everybody kept pointing out that the chords are the same to What If God Is One of Us, I think is the song.
Okay.
And so I had to change the intro to the song so people wouldn't think I was about to sing that song. But I can tell you, I came up with it long before she did. And not that I'm trying to sue her like they just sued Ed Sheeran, but anyway, that's the other thing. I guess my original point was, after I came up with it, I was going around to people and saying, do you recognize this? Because I felt like it was the first time I'd come up with a song and a chord progression. And
oh, wow.
I honestly thought that maybe I had heard it on the radio while I was asleep, listening to the typical top 40 rock and roll stuff. And so I kept asking people. I thought, is this a Neil Young song? Is this, does anybody recognize this? I just kept feeling like I had stolen it. But apparently it was in the zeitgeist because other people have used the exact same chord progression.
Well, yeah.
So there's certainly nothing wrong with that. In fact, can you think of any songs that actually use the same chord progression?
Absolutely, I can. And they're actually two very similar songwriters, very near and dear to my heart as far as my inspirations. There's a Jackson Browne tune that you and I just played not very long ago called Barricades of Heaven, which has the E minor, C, G, D. If you guys are listening at home with a pen and paper and your guitar in your hand, play that song, and then before you put the guitar away, play Warren Zevon's Splendid Isolation. Same chords, a little bit faster, and a lot nastier.
That's the same progression I was just mentioning, but I haven't played Almost Happened in such a long time. I don't remember if it's that. I know it's E minor, C, G. I don't remember it's this. It goes to D, but very different rhythmically. It's not anything like Barricades of Heaven. So, but that's a really good comparison. I can go back to the classic rock and roll. 50s rock and roll chord progression that can be used, whatever key you're in. It can be Twist and Shout. It can be La Bamba. It can be, what else does that? There's like a slew of songs that you can sing one right after the other and put them together in a medley that goes back and forth because they use the exact same chord progression. even Leo Kottke's "My Father's Face," which is kind of a rap song in the sense that it's just spoken lyrics, uses that same progression. But so, again, people, either whether you're a fledgling songwriter or just trying to find new inspiration, there's nothing wrong with going for tried and true chords. I mean, look how many songs use C, F, and G the way that Hank Sr. used them, Hank Williams Sr., used them. And, there's a zillion songs that follow that as well. So,
And not just that, but I want to say this here to get your input, and I'll ask people in the chat and the comments, if you are following along with this on YouTube, I would almost want to say that the song is the melody, and then the chords are secondary. And I don't mean to say chords don't matter, but the four chords we're talking about, maybe in your song, in the Jackson Browne tune, and the Warren Zevon tune, if you would sing those songs a cappella, number one, you might not know what the chords are, and those melodies aren't shared. So I think you can borrow chord progressions a lot more often and not be in trouble of emotionally or legally taking someone's song, but it's the melody that you're singing over those chords, and more importantly, in my opinion, it's the melody independent of the chords. Even if you took the chords out of a song, that's where you can really tell you're listening to the Zevon tune, not the Jackson Browne tune. Where do you stand on that issue? Not to get really into copyright, but do you feel like the song is the song, the melody is the song, or can you describe it differently?
well, I think you go into problems like when George Harrison lost the lawsuit about My Sweet Lord and He's So Fine. They felt that there was enough similarity there that whether it was unconscious or not, that it infringed upon intellectual property. And I agree with you. I remember that Sunday morning CBS show long ago, though I don't remember the composer, but it was like a serious composer, not a pop composer. But the reporter was saying how the great melodies can be played with one finger on a piano, that are unique, that you hear them and the evocative feeling of comes through just hearing that. And some of that is an emotional connection because you remember what the lyrics are. But I agree with you that melody makes the song, takes the lyric and turns it into a song. And it's, of course, different with some modern music, rap music and a lot of hip hop is not melodic. It's based on rhyming chant, which is one of the oldest ways of communicating poetry to anybody. And so that's a little different than when you're talking about traditional melodic Western music. But key can still, chord progressions can still matter. Anybody who's tried to play certain songs with a capo, up the neck, as opposed to trying to transpose it into another key, can learn that the mood or the emotional content of the music part of the song doesn't always work when you're transposing it. And some of that has to do with music theory, with how many flats and all that or sharps and flats are in the key. But sometimes if you cannot sing low enough for a favorite song and you put a capo and you have to go all the way up to 4 or 5, even though you're losing the bass resonance, you're still getting the flavor of the song in terms of the chords you're using and bass runs and that kind of stuff. Where trying to transpose it down in first position, you often will lose the flavor of the song, and it simply won't, it becomes much more stylized. You can get away with it, but it's not going to have the same impact of Mr. Tambourine or Man or October. If you, not to mention, you wouldn't even be able to accomplish the barred hammer-ons that you do in that song if you were transposing it and keeping it down at the nut, without using a capo. So it is a combination of both, and to maintain that the feeling of the melody, is important. So that's a long way of saying I agree with you that the melody of the song is really the song. So I think that's a very very astute thing to say there, Maury. Good for you.
Thank you very much for the compliment, Spoon. It's time we talk about another favorite song of mine. Let me ask you how well you know your catalog. If I don't tell you the title, but I give you a sound effect, would you know which song I mean?
Possibly.
That's 3.
Oh.
4. 5. 6.
Well, that narrows it down. As I take a sip of water and leaks start pouring out, 7 leaks start pouring out of me. So yes, you're obviously referring to Seven Pistols. Yeah. There's a good example of something where I had the music long before I had the lyrics.
Oh.
I had composed some pieces in the open D tuning. So it's, the guitar's tuned to a D chord. And I did that because I had learned Little Martha, which is in open E, but open E is quite a strain on a guitar neck. So most people do it in open D, or I'll do it with open D and a capo. So I had come up with, I said, well, I'm going to need other things to do in open D. So I experimented and came up with some songs in open D, or tunes, instrumentals. And so I thought, well, then I should come up with a song in open D. So I took one of those instrumentals, the one that I thought would work best for lyrics, and came up with this tune called Seven Pistols, which I think a lot of people have written their cowboy song, their outlaw song, the Eagles did an entire album based on that premise. Which was a major influence on me as a kid, the Desperado album, which I still love. So Seven Pistols and I also grew up on cowboy movies and lawman versus outlaw stuff, and grew up in the era of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which I saw multiple times in the movies, and those kind of movies. And so I came up with my own Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid type song, and basically I just had to come up with a bridge, and so it's actually a double bridge. So that's where that song came from.
I still remember hearing you play that at one of the earliest Martin Fests, and I get the name of this CD wrong all the time. Is it called Select Cuts?
Yes, it was called Select Cuts because I had found I don't remember the painter now, but originally I was going to do it with a cover of a famous painter's painting showing 2 butchers standing there holding up pieces of chopped up animals with a bunch of dead animals hanging up behind them. So I changed it and instead found a very jovial looking warthog photo that I put on the cover, and then on the back was like a warthog in profile, which I had then put all the butcher's markings of where the select cuts would be. But anyway, yes, that was a homemade CD that I made to bring to Martin Fest for some friends. But
well, that got a lot of rotation back when we had our first store. The store in the first location. I remember hearing that a lot, and when I met up with you, and those songs were all brand new to me. I hope I can find it because I haven't looked for CDs physically in quite a long time. But that's probably one of my favorite tracks from that CD.
Well, I may be doing a reissue of sorts. I'm probably going to be putting out a second instrumental album at some point, and I will either hopefully technically bring up to date the instrumentals on that CD and include them, because most of them I don't remember how to play anymore, or I'm going to try to relearn them. And then eventually I've always wanted to do an actual CD of my songs with other musicians and take some of those songs from that album and update them as well. So the original recording was actually done on I think a 1960 or 1961 0021, the 12-fret 0021 that is owned by Mac Carter, who was the original main moderator for the unofficial Martin Guitar Forum. And he had gotten it, if I remember, as a high school graduation present. And it was he beat it to death, and he took it to the factory and had to have it retopped with Adirondack spruce. And at the very first Martin Fest, I had met him a couple times at little soirees that he had at his home in New Jersey by this time. But he came up to me at the end of that first Martin Fest and said, "Would you take this home and play it in for me?" because he felt it was just too stiff and it really wasn't, didn't sound like his old guitar. So I got to bring it home for several months and
Wow.
sort of start that Adirondack top on its journey, and recorded that tune. And I basically wrote the song part of it with that guitar and recorded it with that guitar. The video that these people are probably going to see and the little sound snippet actually comes from a live performance in New York City and is on a custom Madagascar rosewood Adirondack spruce short scale triple O.
Ooh.
Basically based on the Lawrence Huber signature model, but in short scale.
Well, folks, what's that old saying? The best laid plans? We had every intention of making this short enough to fit it into one episode, but we failed miserably. This thing is going to pass the 2-hour mark if we're not careful, so I think the best thing to do here is cut it in half and invite you back next week for the thrilling conclusion of Martins and More with Spoon Phillips, Songwriting, Part 2.
This has been a presentation of Maury's Music, your trusted source for Martin and Blue Ridge guitars. Find us online at maurysmusic.com.